For most people, the Catholic Church is far from an ally to the LGBTQ community, which is why it might surprise some to find that the Franciscan friars have special housing, programs, and accommodations for LGBTQ community members at its Mexican refugee center. There's something absolutely extraordinary about what's going on here, and I think the rest of the church can learn from it. Back in 2010, a drug cartel by the name of Los Zetas rounded up and murdered 72 undocumented immigrants, marking the largest single cartel-related massacre in Mexican history. Moved with pity for the thousands of migrants that face violence each day, the friars sprang into action, opening a refugee center later that year. They named it Los 72, the 72, named in honor of the migrants who were murdered. At first, it was simply a place to get some food and a safe shelter to sleep, but they soon began to offer legal services, helping people apply for asylum and citizenship, and medical attention, bringing in Doctors Without Borders. Over time, though, the friars and lay staff began to realize that even this wasn't enough. As they heard people's stories, learning why people were running from their homes and what they were facing along the way, they realized that some people were far more vulnerable than others.
Es muy duro porque en el ambiente de nosotros, del grupo LGTB en nuestro país sufrimos de mucha discriminación, mucho odio. Incluso yo he tenido amigos que ya no están, los han matado en mi país. Hace poco mataron a un director de la comunidad gay en Honduras. Pues nosotros no hicimos caso a lo que nos estaban amenazando. Y resulta de que uno de mis compañeros que trabajaba con nosotros lo hirieron, le pegaron 2 impactos de bala, uno en el pecho y otro en el brazo. Hace como 2 años yo subí con otro amigo mío que era gay también. Se subieron como unos 8 hombres armados con armas, machetes, y nos bajaron del tren. Me bajaron a mí, a mi amigo, nos subieron a una camioneta. Nos subieron a una camioneta negra, nos taparon los ojos y nos secuestraron.
Like nearly every migrant at the center, this man had been through unthinkable violence and was running for his life. What they didn't realize at first was that certain groups of people, women, LGBTQ persons, minors, faced additional risks.
The entire population is vulnerable in some way, right? They don't have documentation, but women, LGBT, and minors are vulnerable in other ways. They're subject to a lot of sexual abuse, sexual assault, and to being trafficked. Right, there's a lot of human trafficking, which also happens to men, but in a much larger percentage to women, to LGBT, and to minors.
While the other migrants were running from violence from specific people and so were relatively safe within the walls of the center, the women, LGBTQ members, and minors were running from ideas that couldn't be kept out. Discrimination, denial of services, sexual assault, kidnapping, and random acts of violence, not just from the cartels and police officers, but from other migrants themselves. Some of the men seeking asylum, being a product of their culture, brought with them the hate of their culture. Sexism, homophobia, extortion of minors. While every man is by no means an abuser, some of them were absolutely a danger to others. And so, they set up different modules, places where certain groups could receive extra protection, a place to share their common experiences in a group therapy type session, and even classes on how to better themselves.
They tend to find these spaces safer for them, and also more than safe, these places where they can find community.
What I found so powerful about it, even prophetic, was the witness that it gave first to the world, but then to the migrants themselves. Obviously, there's a message to the world that is so important to hear, which is that we serve people not because of who they are, not because they match some moral standard that we set for them, but because we have been entrusted to care for those who cannot care for themselves. And so if there are people in this world more vulnerable than others, they require extra care. In the case of migrants in Mexico, but really our world at large, women, the LGBTQ community, and minors are particularly vulnerable. Despite growing protections and even acceptance in our society today, LGBTQ people still face difficulties like nobody else, being made fun of, experiencing discrimination, and even having their very life questioned. As a result, LGBTQ youth are at a higher risk of substance abuse, mental health issues, and suicide attempts than their straight brothers or sisters. Our concern must be for the well-being of all people, obviously, but if there is a particular group at a higher risk, the gospel call impels us to give them greater attention. And that's important and great and absolutely necessary for our church and world to hear, but think about the other part of this, what I would argue is even more universally relevant and even subversive. The witness it gave to the other migrants. At this center, you will find some of the most vulnerable people in the entire world. People who have been through more than most anyone watching this video. Violence, poverty, extortion, walking on foot 1,000 miles for a better life, being hated by the locals everywhere they go. It is hard to get lower than that. But then imagine going to a place like this and seeing that you are not the lowest of the low, that there is someone even more vulnerable than you, and you might be part of the reason why this is the case. Think about it. Why are there modules for these special groups? Not to protect them from the outside world, but to protect them from the other vulnerable group. Even if they had never hit or abused or attacked another, as is the case for most of them, might they have contributed to the culture of fear with their hurtful jokes, failing to stand up for another when someone else was being violent, encouraging bad behavior, simply not caring? What I think it does is shake us out of seeing only our problems. Just because we've had it bad, just because people have hurt us, does not mean that we have had it the worst, and it does not mean that we are free of guilt of the harm we've caused in others. All of us are at the same time victim and sinner. All of us, no matter who we are or what people have done to us, have contributed in some way to the social sin of the world. Knowingly or unknowingly, we are capable of and have caused pain in other people's lives. It is important to be aware of how others have hurt us so that we may protect ourselves, absolutely. But that's the easy part. Accepting that we may have hurt others and that others might need protection from us, that takes a lot of humility. But that is exactly where we need to be as Christians.